Hey everyone, ED's20, back with continuing the Four-Lands report. Quite a bit overdue. Got distracted doing the last of the media threads, some editing, some Bandori time, other assorted things. And I also like to wait till days off to record, it's more comfortable. But yeah, so I've still been reading this. Well, listening to it and reading it every so often. As you can see, yeah, that's all passed, and that's all that's left. Currently on the second half of the last book, which is Wish Song, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about the second book, which is Elfstones. I thought it was a pretty amusing reading Elfstones. Not reading it, the title, just because I was like, are the Elfstones really all that big a deal? Because in my head, the main characters, the Elmsfords, are always carrying them around because they can use them and they're like the only people who can use them. But thinking about it now, as I'm halfway through Wish Song, it's like, no, yeah, that's the most Elfstone usage and the most Elfstone focus any of these three books have gotten. Because the first, they were in it, yeah, and they were used, I want to say, like 3 times. But it was more about the sword. The sword was needed to solve everything, basically, and defeat the Warlock Lord and all that stuff. The Elfstones would not have helped. Whereas in the second book, I think the Elfstones are used actually not as much either. But even without their use, because for a lot of the book, Wil is incapable of using them. But once he's totally cool with it, he's blasting shit like crazy. And then in Wish Song, it looks like the Elfstones aren't going to be used in the book at all, which is surprising to me. I'm like, I didn't remember this at all. Anyway, going back to... I mentioned in the media thread, because I recorded that before this, and obviously published it before this, that one thing that surprised me about Elfstone, just right off the bat, which I'll mention, is the call to adventure taking so much longer. And now that I've read Wish Song, it's also like that. I mean, it's even more unique, because Sword and Wish Song, the main Elmsfords, go out on the quest like that. And in this one, the quest in Elfstones, the quest does not start till like halfway through the book. I think 20 chapters in. Reason being, they're collecting everybody up, so it takes a while. So I forget. It's a few chapters before Wil Elmsford is even introduced, and then another chapter after that until Amberle is introduced. Because everything starts with the Elves and the Chosen, and then Allanon showing up, talking to Eventide, and trying to figure out how to save the Elicris. Because the whole plot of the story is that the Elicris is this magical tree in the elven city of Arbelon. That part of its power is that it holds up a wall, like a magic wall known as the Forbidding, which keeps all the demons who used to roam the world locked away in some weird limbo world, other dimension. I don't know exactly what it is, but they're just not in this reality. Not in this plane. And the Elicris is dying, and once it dies, and as it dies, the Forbidding grows weaker, allowing some stronger demons to get through, and once it dies, the entire army's gonna bust through. So they're like, okay, we need to restore it, we need to fix the tree, so that it fixes everything, and it restores the wall and banishes the demons again. Or else. And it's dying, and so they need to figure that out. And the tree itself can speak, and it asks the Chosen to help it, tells them what to do to restore it, and naturally one of the main evil demon in the book, the Dagdamur, or the Dagdamur, he got through first along with 2 buddies, because of course, like I said, the wall doesn't have to be broken for them to get through, but it's really weak, and some of them are really strong. And his buddy, I think it's the Reaper. Yeah, it's the Reaper. Goes and kills all the Chosen. So they're like, oh, we're screwed. We can't fix the tree. But then it turns out, no, there is another. And that's Amberle, the other lead of the book. Which then leads to Allanon getting Wil, and then going to get Amberle, then coming back to the city and being like, okay, go. And that whole process is like the first, I want to say 20 chapters. Because him getting to each of them takes a bit, and then them getting to Arbelon also takes quite a bit. And then once they get to Arbelon, and they meet with the king and everything in the council, that's when they're told the ultimate goal of what they have to do, which is to reach the Bloodfire and put the Elicris seed in there and then bring it back. Simple as. course, nothing's ever simple. But there are a lot of misadventures along the way. A bunch of demons hound them. They get saved by the King of Silver River. Allanon gets lost for a bit. They run into what they call the what are the rovers, the like the traveling thieves and whatever. So yeah, there's actually a lot of stuff that happens before they even reach the city and start their proper adventure. But man, still thinking about it, it's another good thing that I read the book in such a short amount of time compared to Sword that I still remember a lot of its details, even though I've moved on to Wish Song, which is nice. And yeah, this is the book. I can't remember how long until it starts out, because for most of it, it follows Allanon until he gets Amberle and Wil, and then they go off on their own. And it's not until after they leave to go and start the quest to get to the Bloodfire that they start developing on the side the Elven storyline, which is the war with the demons. That in of itself takes a while, because it takes a while for the Elcris to die. And I'm just kind of curious what the original game plan was, now that I think about it. Because the idea was for Wil and Amberle, they leave the Elven capital with, I think, like half a dozen home guard, Elven rangers, and just really strong, really cool people trusted by the king and all stuff. They're like really well known, highly regarded. It's like if anyone's gonna get the job done, it's them. And they were going to go all the way through the Westland, further out. So far, it's not even on the map. A lot of the locations in this book and in Wish Song. Well, actually, I'm not sure about Wish Song. I need to look at the map. But in Elfstones are not actually in the map that's on the inside cover, because they're going way far to reach Safehold is what they're going for, which is located in... Okay, here we go. I had to look for it, but I found it. The Wilderrun is where they're going to. And in the Wilderrun is Safehold. And in Safehold is the Bloodfire. That was it. I was looking up and I remembered. You know, it's one thing I love about fictional worlds, and something I always hoped that I could do. And I think some people told me that I have done it. But it's just the names of fictional things are really cool. So the Wilderrun is one thing. And currently in Wish Song, the characters are going across this mountain range known as the Wolfstag, which I think is also a really cool name. The Sarendanen is this big, these open plains, the breadbasket of the Elven nation, as they say in the book. The rivers have really cool names. There's one in Wish Song that they're at right now. It's just stuff like that I really like. I like Arbelon too. That's a cool name. And then the characters themselves have really interesting names that I enjoy. I think Eventide is great. He has his sons Arian and Ander. Just cool stuff. But yeah, so that was it. It's not until they're well on their way to the Wilderrun that the forbidding finally fails and the demons start pouring through, and then that B plot starts, which is a great B plot. Like I remember thinking it was cool, but actually reading it again, I'm like, oh, it's even better. Like much like the final action scene from the end of Sword, the fight at Tircis, which is great. It lasts multiple chapters. It's really well written and engaging. The many fights with the demons is the same thing. So they had a Hallis Cut. I can't remember if Hallis Cut or Bay and Draw was or were those both fights, because they split the Elven army into two to first meet the demons at two separate locations. And I think the one we follow is Ander's army at Hallis Cut, and then Ander's army, right? I said it right. And Arian's army is at the other one, and I think Bay and Draw is their fallback point. I could be wrong, because I know that they fight for a while on the Sarendanen, which is where they're holding the enemy off before they're unfortunately forced to retreat, to do a fighting retreat all the way back to Arbelon. But just all the fights are great. Just the description of all the demons, and just their mass of just nastiness overcoming the elves, because there's just so many of them. But yeah, that's the general flow of the story. You know, just Allanon got to get them. They got to go. These other people have to fight and survive. And there's a whole bunch of shenanigans in the middle. When it comes to characters, in case we can move that to talk about more specific people. Let me think. Who do I want to head up for? I guess Wil and Amberle, since they are obviously the leading ones and the ones who drive most of the action and story, are really good. Like, I really liked Shay and Flick as the Elmsford for the first book. Wil is Shay's grandson. Shay is not in this book. He's mentioned. He's still alive, but Flick is actually in the first, not the first chapter, but the chapter that introduces Wil. Flick is there, because Wil is training to be a healer in Storlock, which is a location from the first book. So it's really nice to see him there. Wil comes off as so very different from Shay and Flick. It is funny though that Flick is, even now, all these years later, I think it's been 50 years. Yeah, 50 years between these two books, and it's 20 years between the next two. But he still just doesn't trust Allanon, like, at all, even though everything went well, I guess you could say. I mean, everything went as it was supposed to go back in Sword, even if they did end up losing Shay after the Hall of Kings and everything, and that was prophesized, but it was still kind of a misstep, to say nothing of how it definitely felt like the end of that journey, probably for Flick, was more of a like a hastily cobbled together plan to try to make everything work out, and it somehow did. But Wil really takes his words to heart and isn't really trusting of Allanon, but even more than that, he's very mistrusting of himself. I think him and Amberle going closer over the course of the journey is nice, because they start off with Amberle not really caring so much about him, and he's just trying to do the job that he was given, which is just to protect her and make sure she gets to where she has to go. Yeah, I really did like Wil. Very different vibe than I remember, especially going even into Wish Song, but I liked him. And it's funny that his ultimate issue was self-made, which is, I think, completely understandable, that he just so easily allows himself to believe he can't do something, and then he can't do it, and so he's convinced he can't do it, but it's only because he believed he couldn't in the first place. And it's a lot about how the magic in the Shannara books generally works, and the way that it works is more about the belief and understanding of what it is that allows you to make the use of it, which is why Gerald Shannara couldn't kill Brona, because he couldn't accurately use the Sword of Shannara's power of truth, whereas Shay was actually able to. And it's here again with Wil and the Elfstones, is that he tricked himself into being incapable of using them. It would have been nice a few times to be able to pull them out. But yeah, I liked Amberle. Like, she was like the most who just did not want to do this for a completely understandable. I think her reasoning for abandoning her role as a chosen and leaving the Elcris and just not being happy with the tree all makes a lot of sense. And even though Allanon explains at the end of the book why the tree was so determined to talk to Amberle, and even though understanding what the tree's perspective was, it's also easy to understand why Amberle didn't take it well. It definitely kind of, the tree ruined its own plan. But of course, once again, we get into the whole thing. But if Amberle never left and she was there, would she have just been killed with the rest of the chosen? You know, it's like, well, that didn't happen. It's always one of those things where, well, what if? And it's like, well, we can't do anything about the what ifs. But aside from Wil and Amberle, the rest of the cast is all gathered at Arbelan with Allanon, Ander, Arion, Eventide. Who else we got? Pindanon, right? Pindanon, and then eventually Stejan shows up. And it's funny, when he showed up as the Free Corps. This is something interesting, and it was really cool also how much the world keeps moving, because it has been 50 years since Sword. So naturally, with that big of a time skip, the setting of the world changes. And as a result of the big war that broke out at the end of the first book, the different countries actually reacted to it in different ways, or the different cities reacted to it in different ways, and joined up to create like a united, I think they call it the Federation. And it's useless. At least it was through all of Elfstones, and the only time it's so far been mentioned in Wish Song was once again negatively. So that all the cities of men joining together to try to be a stronger united force, it's not flying too well. And even, unfortunately, Callahorn also falls under that, since Balinor died between books, and his successor is not him. Like, the elves are definitely reaching out to everybody else for help, and the only thing that Callahorn and anyone in the Federation can provide is the Free Corps, which is a few hundred super elite soldiers. Like they're really great in the way that they're just it's like a sacrificial army basically. They're guys who are really good at doing what they do and really good at dying. And that's the whole thing. So they go in first and they'll just absolutely hammer the enemy regardless of how much of them are lost. And they're led by Steve Jans, who I'm like, oh man, I remember this guy. He's another character I like, which I also mentioned in the media thread. He falls in the same category as Balinor from Sword and Garrett Jax from Wish Song, as just being a character that I thought was super cool and one that I really liked. And he is really neat. And obviously Ander grows to like him a lot and promotes him to commander after Pindanon dies during, I think, the fight in the Sarandanon, I believe is when he dies. And yeah, which this book was a lot more ruthless than the first one, because even the first one, you only lost, the only character of note that was lost was Hendel, who was there for a majority of the story. Kelt said, while he did die too towards the end of the book, he didn't have a lot going for him, specifically because he couldn't talk. So it's not like we got a lot of characterization about him, it's more just his actions. But for this book, they knock out a lot of people. It's kind of crazy, the amount of characters that you do get to know or get to hang out with a bit before they go out. Pindanon being one of them. And man, between this book and Wish Song, I just wonder what it is that Anderle still did that, like, caused him everything to happen to him, that he pretty much loses his entire family. But yeah, good times. Good times. Yeah, just Steve Jans is just really cool. He's known as the Iron Man. Just it's like almost nothing can kill him. He and his Free Corps pull off a lot of strategies on the demons, which is really awesome to not really win the fight for the elves, but keep them fighting, because they get overrun so quickly at Hallis Cut, it's not even funny. Like, they have their defensive positions all set up, but even hundreds of elves in a perfectly executed defensive line, when thousands of demons are ramming against you over and over again, it's gonna break. And you can stand there and try to hold them back, but it's not gonna last, which is what they all learn after Hallis Cut, and why Ander is like so aggressive with Pindanon, or like so against Pindanon's more aggressive idea of just repeating that strategy, which is just so funny that the commander of the armies would think that they just do the strategy again and it'll work the second time. Not so. Yeah, this is also the book that had, yes, between the 3 books of the trilogy, this first trilogy, this was the book that had the most Druid fire, because Allanon was a pivotal part in the fight against the demons, and he was constantly using his Druid fire on pretty much everything that he could. Even took out a dragon pretty early on, which was awesome. I like the idea. I also like, it's something that constantly happens, and I'm always trying to remember it in my head as I'm reading or listening to the description of what the monsters look like. But even the dragon had a very interesting design. It was 6-legged, had 1 eye, I believe, the way it was described, and it didn't even breathe fire. It's not something that it was capable of in this book, at least. But yeah, just stuff like that is very cool. Say nothing of the Dag Damour and the giant bat that it rides on at the climax. But man, it was a really good time reading this, and I like Elfstones it was great. Like, I do remember, the thing about Elfstones that stood out to me the most was the ending, for pretty obvious reasons. But getting there, and going through this whole adventure was like really good. It was a really great read. And it just makes me excited for more, because I'm already enjoying Wish Song, and I'm still halfway through that, but I've got only 1 other Shannara book on me, but now it reinvigorates my desire to grab all the elements. And like I said before, I will not be getting the compilation sets anymore, not after this. Honestly, this is more of a shelf piece than an actual book to read. I will say that, like honestly, clearly, truly, that I would not recommend it. Like, if you want to, if you're a fan of these books, I think the only reason you want to get this is if you're like one of those collectors or something like that, and you want to own like all versions of it or something like that. Or like if you own Sword, Elfstones, and Wish Song separately, and then you just want the compilation one too, sure. But I would definitely, like, if you were getting into the book series, which, I mean, I would hope by now you've read them yourself, so that I'm not just spoiling everything. even though that is what these videos are. It's not convenient at all to read from this. Like, the book is too big, it's too heavy, the font size is too small. And of course it's like, oh man, maybe you just have weak hands. I mean, sure. But I mean, I think regardless of what you think, just holding this thing open like this for much at a time, trying to read it, and flip the pages on it, and I was never comfortable reading this one. Every time that I sit down or lay down to try to read a few chapters, I would definitely prefer the smaller book, like, super honest. So yeah, I think for all the other books in the future, in this series, I'm gonna get them individually. I would prefer to get hardcovers though. I love hardcovers. It's just unfortunate that the other ones that I do have are soft covers. I didn't think to get. I don't know if they're actually available in hard. Yeah, just a side note I want to put in there real quick. Elfstones is so crazy good, but I really like the forward too, when you learn from Terry Brooks of how hard that book was to write, and it does really get me thinking. Like, I remember talking in the first book, which I'm always curious about how you start a book, and I'm always curious how you follow it up. That's a very difficult thing to do, I imagine. Like, doing one book is hard enough. Trying to do another one's crazy. And based off his forward, yeah. I think Elfstones went through so much revision that actually the first draft, the original version of the book, according to his note, wasn't even Elfstones. It was a completely different story that just didn't fly. And his editor was like, not doing that one. That's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that one. And it changed so much to the point that Elfstones is entirely different from his original idea. But Elfstones is good, so that's cool. It's very cool. I guess I could talk about the ending, just to get into that. Also, as a side note, this is the book, Elfstones is the book that was adapted into the TV show. That was on... what channel? It was on a weird channel. It was called Legends of Shannara. I think it ran for 2 seasons. But I think when I read online the episode synopsises, it looked like season 1 was the entirety of Elfstones. Like, it ended at the same place that the book ended. So like, then what's season 2? I've never known how that show did, because I've never watched it, and I've never heard any public reaction to it. The most was once in a random video I was watching, where someone in the comments, they were talking about adaptations and good or bad adaptations. Someone in the comments mentioned how terrible it was in comparison to the book. I'm kind of curious. Part of me has like this curiosity that maybe I should watch it, just see what I think. But I don't know, man. I don't know if I want to see like my favorite book series just treated in a weird way. But I mean, I don't know, because I don't know. This literally all these years later, which has been a long time since that aired. That's the only comment I've ever seen out in the wild about it. I've never actually looked into it myself. But anyway, back to the ending. The ending, I thought was very nice, and it was curious too. It made me re-examine the book, and it was something that as I was rereading, I was thinking about the ending. I'm like, so who knows how it's gonna end? Clearly, Allanon figures out how the story is gonna end 2 or 3 chapters into the book. Like when he goes back to Paranor, and in order to try to find out where Safehold is and how to revitalize the Elecris, he basically reads a book that tells him how the story is gonna end. But yeah, the idea was that Amberle was specifically chosen as the first female chosen in so many years because the Elecris already knew, or at least had some suspicion that it was going to die. And it talking to her was trying to kind of prepare her in some sort of ways for taking on the tree's role. I honestly thought that she knew. Because one of the last things she says to Allanon before she and Wil leave Arbelan is that she wants to talk to her mom. She wants to say something to her mom before she goes off on the adventure. And Allanon says, no, we can't let you talk to her because of this and that. We need to be fast and this and that and this and that. And she's adamant on this. And she's got spine, and she just does not take Allanon anything that he says. And she's like, no, we're doing it this way. I want to say bye to my mom. And then she tells him specifically, and don't tell me to just say hi when I come back. And he has the reaction to her. And that's what convinces him to let her talk to her. That he arranges the meet. And so I knew from that, obviously he did know, but I was curious if her saying that means she knew. But there's certain other things, and especially something she says towards the end of the book, that makes me think she only learned the truth of how it was all going to end when she reached the Bloodfire. Which is in essence that the seed and the Bloodfire kind of combines with her and transforms her into the new Elicris and rebirths it that way. So technically she in a way dies, I guess, transforms, how you want to say it. She's gone. It happens very suddenly too. Doesn't have a chance to say anything to Wil about it. I think she tries to tell him at the end about it, but decides against it. Because, I mean, granted, at the end of the book, Wil's out of it due to the final battle with the Reaper and everything. He's just exhausted. Pretty much on autopilot for the ending when she becomes a tree. Yeah, so Ander Lysidel, his brother, Arian, his elder brother, who he had a lot of problems with, wouldn't even talk to him for like 5 or 6 chapters, just dies. And they never got to bury that hatchet. Amberle gets turned into the tree, and then Eventide dies also, like in the, I think it's in the last chapter of the book, or the next to last chapter of the book. And that's just everybody gone. It's freaking crazy to think about. Like, geez, sucks to be Ander, and it unfortunately forces him. After Arian died, at the same time that Arian died, Eventide was also knocked out, which kind of forced Ander into the position of being in charge. And it's another one of those things that Allanon knew from the beginning, because he's always supporting Ander's position in things, because he knows that when this all ends, Ander will be king, regardless of anything else. So, yeah, I also like, what I also liked about this book, compared to the first one, is that there was more falling action, which I was grateful for. I would have liked more still, maybe another chapter, but I did like the take and how we did get to see everybody, all the main characters who came to Arbelon, who came back to Arbelon. We got to see their final farewells to Ander and to the city as they left, whether it was Stejans and the Free Corps, Allanon having his last conversation with Wil and Ander, Perk, this other character who Wil and Amberle met on the way to the Wilderrun, and of course the ending specifically with Wil saying goodbye in a way to the Elicris and to Amberle before he and Eritrea, another character that Wil and Amberle met on their way to Arbelon, and going home. And I thought it was interesting that the last moments of the book were from Ander Lysidel's perspective of seeing Eritrea and Wil. I would have liked to hear their conversation. I know it probably wouldn't have been anything mind-blowing, but if we could have gotten a few more paragraphs of him talking to her, of Ander talking to Wil and Eritrea, I would have been happy with it. But I'm satisfied. I think it's still better than how abruptly the ending of Sword was. I felt this was much better because it did give us time with everyone. It didn't just have the characters disappear. Because a lot of them just don't get to say much of anything at the end of Sword if they're not Flick or Shay, or Allanon. And even then, he's not in the last chapter of the book, of course, because he already left by then. But yeah, it's a good ending. Sad, but we get down in the dumps there. Like I said many times before, like, this guy has a knack for killing really good characters, and it's something that continues. It continues. I'm still in the middle of Witch Song, but I already know what's gonna happen, and because I was always confused as to which story Witch Song was. I wasn't 100% sure. I knew there was 2 separate ones that had different characters, and it all depended on how the book began. And once the book began and we were introduced to certain elements, and then once a certain character popped up, I was like, oh, okay, this is that. So that means that's that. So, yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that. Yeah. I think, now that I reached the end, this one came out a lot better than the Sword talk, but that's fine. Oh, I just remembered, there was one other thing I wanted to hit on. I think I was in the middle of building up to a point, and then I lost track and didn't get to the point. But the plan, I'm really curious about the plan, because the idea is the Elicris is dying once it and the Forbidding's weakening, it dies completely, the Forbidding's completely gone, the Westland gets overrun, and then demons overrun the rest of the world, game over, right? Wil and Amberle go off with elves to the far westland, and their whole goal is to cross these rivers, be on the river by boat, get to an elven outpost, grab some horses, and then ride there through the mountains, get to the overrun, get to Safehold, and then double back. By the time the story has reached this conclusion, the demons are in Arbelon. Like, they're actively roaming the streets and killing people, and everybody's fighting back around the corpse of the tree in the Gardens of Life. It's like literally the final... It's their last line of defense. Once it breaks, it's over. That's the situation that Wil and Amberle find the elves in when they come back. And they cheated, because on the way they got stopped at every possible opportunity and had to take so many alternate routes because the Reaper had beat them to every single location because he had all the information about where they were going. And he was constantly following them. He killed all the elven guards until Wil and Amberle were by themselves. And the only way they got to where they were going was thanks to Perk, who is a sky elf, as they're called. They ride rocks. And he takes them to the overrun. And then after they leave Safehold, they call him down to pick them up and then take them from Safehold all the way back to Arbelon. And they reach Arbelon, like I said, during the elves' last line of defense to restore the forbidding at the last possible second. So what was the plan? If everything went to plan and they got to the overrun and Safehold on time with the rest of the elves, could they have made it all the way back before they got overrun? Because they, even with horses, and they had to go through mountains, they would have had to go through mountains to get to the overrun. They couldn't have just flown over it. That's kind of, like, it's just interesting. Like, I guess, to be fair, no one in the story knew how long the Elchris would live. It was the reason they were all trying to act so quickly. Because they knew it needed to be done quickly. But man, if it wasn't for Perk and their like quick travel back to Arbelon, everything would have been screwed. And everything was screwed super hard with how many people died trying to defend the Elchris in Arbelon at the very end of the book. But Allanon's big fight with the leader of the demons, the Dagdamor, was really cool too. It's also one of those situations where it just illustrates how the antagonists are more faceless, and like they don't really have defined personalities as characters. They're just antagonists. And honestly, I'm totally down with that. I don't mind it. I think it really depends on the situation, because I know someone will definitely... Well, I mean, I don't know if someone will, but it might be a little hypocritical, since one of my most anticipated games of all time, which became one of my least favorite games of all time, has just featureless, personality lacking, empty villains, and I consider it such a betrayal. And in the Shannara books, the villains generally are... The Warlock Lord was featureless, and the Dagdamor is just a very powerful demon. They're super simple, and they don't have a lot going for them, but I don't need a lot for these books specifically, because the role they fulfill, I think, is just better. I don't know. Maybe it's hypocritical. I don't think it is, but I just prefer it more the way that it's done and handled here, because at least the Warlock Lord established it as the first villain, and the Dagdamor kind of continues it in his own way, even though he had more screen time, page time. Whereas in the other situation, we had two games of incredibly well-developed villains with their own motives and reasons for what they were doing, who had really interesting counterpoint with the heroes. And then we get to the third where also they change it to, yeah, they don't have any of that. So I think it's more noticeable to go from really great to ass versus okay and okay. Like an understandable standard evil villain and then another understandable standard evil villain, you know? I'm fine with it in the book, and I liked it. Also, I do think it's funny how because the other one, when the Dagdamor came over, he brought two demons with him. One was the Reaper, which was chasing them the entire book, and the other was the Changeling. I thought it was amusing because Eventide, the king of the elves, has a pet dog named Manx, and I was like, nothing better happened to that dog. And then they reveal like some chapters in that the dog was that the changeling had swapped places with the dog. So at some point in the story, he killed the dog and took its place as the king's pet, which is how the demons and the Reaper knew all the plans that the good guys, and why he was able to follow them where they were going, because he knew what he was doing. He knew what they were doing. So because the dog. And I was like, oh man, the dog. Should have expected that though. It was incredibly obvious in hindsight that would probably happen, but I mean everything's obvious in hindsight. Feel bad for Manx, but that's what happened. But yes, forgot about the changeling, and then the changeling had his own really cool big fight with Eventide. I honestly thought Eventide was gonna die there. I was surprised he survived the fight. It got me to the point where I'm pretty sure Eventide dies. I'm surprised he's still alive, but then he does die in the final chapter as a result of those injuries. It's one of those instances, one of those things at the end of someone's life in like these fictional, in all these fictional settings that, because like the last thing he says to Ander when he's at his best size, he asks him if Amberle is safe, like did she come back, because he tells him that the war is over, that they won, that the tree has been restored and the demons are gone. So he asks, is Amberle safe? And Ander at that point knows that she's gone too, because she's the tree, and he just says, yeah, she's safe, she's resting, and then Eventide dies after that. And it's like, I mean, fuck, after everything that guy's been through, I guess, and whether or not he knew the truth, or that he could surmise the truth in hiding in Ander's words, it doesn't really matter, but it was that was a send-off. And as Allanon says, like at that point with Eventide's death, the only people from the Sword adventure who are still alive are him, Shay, and Flick. And then by Wish Song, it's just him. So yeah, it was really good. I really liked Elfstones. That was a fun book to read. But yeah, really like to keep these going. Of course, I only have so many books, like I said. Yeah, so like in addition to the trilogy, I've got First King, the prequel to the trilogy, which I believe came out after. And like I said, I want to read all these in release order, so at least I'm pretty sure I do. Yeah, if I just look inside, I'll have the list of the books. Here we go. Oh no, that's not the list I wanted to see. That's fine, whatever. And then after that, I'm gonna go hop back in time with the Word and the Void books, which I currently only have 2. This one, which I've had for many years, and I've already read actually a few years ago. So reading it again will be the 3rd time that I've read this book. And then Night of the Word, one of my Christmas gifts, the 2nd book in the series. It's funny, I couldn't find this version of the cover, which is to match the 1st book, and the 3rd book is blue, Angel Fire East. I couldn't find this one on Amazon. Everywhere I looked, it was a hardcover with a different image, and I'm like, I'd prefer a hardcover, 100%. But I already own this one in paperback, so I was like, well, then I need it to match. And it turns out that the reason I couldn't find it was because I wasn't clicking on the right thing. They have like a little tab in the corner on Amazon. It says, do you want the hardcover, the mass market paperback, the Kindle version, or this? And hitting mass market paperback changes it to this cover. So I was like, oh, my bad. But yeah, so those are the other books that I will read after Sorrow First King, and then Running with Demon, Night of the Word. And then by then I'll probably pick up Angel Fire East. But I do have some other books over there that I want to read before I consider buying more, so I'll probably just read not Running with Demon, First King, and then save these for later. Anyway, yes, that's in the future of the Four Lands report. So anyway, until then, thank you everybody so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hasta.